السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. اليوم قراءة قصة إنجليزية بعنوان Tyrannosaurus Drip. The Tyrannosaurus Drip. In a swamp beside a river, where the land was thick with veg, lived a herd of duck-billed dinosaurs who roamed the water's edge. And they hooted up with rivers, and they hooted up with reeds, and they hooted up with bellyfuls of juicy water weeds. Now across the rushy river, on a hill the other side, lived a mean Tyrannosaurus with his grim and grisly bride. And they shouted up with hunting, and they shouted up with war, and they shouted up with bellyfuls of duck-billed dinosaur. But the two Tyrannosauruses, so grisly mean and grim, couldn't catch the duck-billed dinosaurs, because they couldn't swim. And they muttered down with water, and they muttered down with wet. And they muttered, "What a shame that a bridge aren't invented yet." Now a little Compsognathus, but for short we'll call her Comp, found a duckbill egg from a nest beside the swamp. And they swam with it and ran with it, and murmured, "Clevered me," and won't the baby Combs be thrilled with the duckbill egg for? She dropped the egg in terror and went running for her life from the mean Tyrannosaurus and his grim and grisly wife. And the duckbill egg went rolling, and at last it came to rest in, of all unlikely places, the Tyrannosaurus nest. Now the mother T had a great big jaws, and great enormous legs, but her brain was rather little, and she couldn't count her eggs, and she sang, "Hatch out, my terrors, with your scaly little tails, and your spiky little toothies, and your scary little nails." Out hatched babies 1 and 2, as perfect as could be, but Mother T was horrified by baby number 3. And she grumbled, "He looks weedy," and she grumbled, "He looks weak," and she grumbled, "What long arms, and look, his mouth is like a beak." "He just needs feeding up," said Dad, and gave the babes some meat. The first 2 gulped and guzzled, but the third refused to eat. And he said, "I am really sorry." And he said, "I simply can't." And he said, "I simply can't." And he said, "This meat looks horrible. I'd rather eat a plant." "A plant?" yelled Mom and her. And Dad said, "Get a grip, his sisters found a name for him, Tyrannosaurus Drip." And they shouted up with hunting, and they shouted up with war, and they shouted up with bellyfuls of duck-billed dinosaur. Poor Tyrannosaurus Drip tried hard to sing along, but the others yelled, "You silly Drip, you have got the words all wrong. For he hooted down with hunting, and he hooted down with war, and he hooted down with bellyfuls of duckbill dinosaur. Drip's sisters soon grew big enough to hunt with Dad and Mum, but they turned on Drip and told him, "You are not fierce enough to come." And he cried, "They've gone without me?" And he cried, "Alakade." And he cried, "This doesn't feel like home. I'm going to run away." So he ran off to the river, where he saw a lovely sight, and heard of a duckbill dinosaurs all hooting with delight. And they hooted up with rivers, and they hooted up with reeds, and they hooted up with bellyfuls of juicy water weeds. As he stood there on the bank, a sudden urge took hold of him, and jumped into the water, and discovered he could swim, and the duckbills come to greet him by the rushy river's edge, and they hooted, "Nice to see you," and they hooted, "Have some veg." And Drip, who, delighted that they hadn't run away, ate billfuls of water weeds and played with them all day. Then he gazed into the river, and he asked them, who is that creature in the water?" And they laughed and said, "It's you." That night the lightning crackled, and a storm blew down a tree, and it fell across the river, and the tees cried out, "Yippee!" And they shouted up with hunting, and they shouted up with war, and they shouted up with bellyfuls of duckbill dinosaur. Drip's sisters stepped onto the bridge, but then began to frown, for there in front of them stood Drip, who yelled, "Look out, look down!" And they looked into the water, and they each let out a yelp, and one cried, "Water monsters!" and the other one cried, "Help!" Their mother scolded, "Nonsense," and she joined them on the tree. Then she looked into the water and exclaimed, "God gracious me!" The three of them stood trembling, and Dad said, "Get a grip. You are all of you as dribby as Tyrannosaurus Drip." He trod onto the bridge and scoffed, "I bet there is nothing there." Then he looked into the water, and jumped into the air. And how the duckbills hooted when he landed with a crash, and the tree bridge broke, and 4 Tyrannosaurus went splash. And spluttering and clinging to the branches of the tree, then went washing down a waterfall and all the way to the sea. And the duckbills hooted happily, and they hooted, "Hip, hip, hip, hooray for the heroic one and only duckbill Drip." The end.